Disclaimer. The following content contains graphic descriptions and may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. The tranquil suburbs of Sydney, Australia, are often associated with idyllic family life. But behind the manicured lawns and friendly smiles, darkness can lurk. On a cold July night in 2019, the unthinkable happened. An argument ensued between Jessica and her mother Rita. There was a struggle. Jessica knocked her mother to the ground, grabbed her by the hair, dragging her to the kitchen, where it escalated into a gruesome, horrific tragedy. The victim? 57-year-old Rita Camilleri, a loving mother. Rita having been described as a devoted mother, and that she had a heart of gold and would do anything for anyone. The perpetrator? Her own daughter, 25-year-old Jessica. This was not just a murder. It was a frenzied attack that shook the community to its core. Jessica Camilleri killed her mother Rita Camilleri on July 19th in the kitchen of their home they shared together in Western Sydney. The weapon of choice? Kitchen knives. Rita Camilleri suffered over 100 stab wounds during an attack that lasted some time. 7 knives, 4 of them breaking during the onslaught. The attack on Rita was so severe that she was decapitated. Her tongue, eyes, and nose were also cut out. Defensive wounds on Rita's hands spoke volumes of the terror and pain she must have felt in her final moments. Jessica was horror movie obsessed and would watch these type of movies over and over, pausing and rewinding her favorite parts. Her favorite film was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. It featured victims being violently murdered and dismembered. After the attack on her mother, Jessica called 000, claiming she acted in self-defense. Jessica claimed that her mother was the one who dragged her by the hair, and it was she who was being attacked. Jessica said that to save her life, quote, "In self-defense, I stabbed her back and just kept stabbing her. I took her head off." The brutality of the attack left even seasoned investigators speechless. Jessica had also asked the emergency services personnel and police whether or not they could reattach her mother's head. The peace of St. Clair was irrevocably broken. There would be many lives that will never be the same again. During the attack, a young child of 4 years old was also injured. He was staying with his grandmother Rita, who was babysitting him that night. When he saw what was happening to his grandmother, he courageously jumped onto Jessica's back, trying to stop her, and struck her with a lid of a cardboard toy box. When Jessica went to shrug the child off her back, she caused a deep laceration to his cheek, head, and hands. Not only was the young child physically injured whilst trying to protect his grandmother, but he has to live with the traumatizing horror of witnessing the gruesome death of his grandmother that fateful day. This case served as a chilling reminder that evil can lurk behind closed doors. After the attack, Jessica carried her mother's head outside the front of their home, even dropping it, and went to neighbours asking for help and to ring 000. This is not just a story of a horrific crime, it's about delving into the mind of Jessica Camilleri. Was it mental illness, a history of family dysfunction, or a toxic combination of both? Her case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of mental illness left untreated. We must seek to understand the complexities of human behaviour and the fragility of the human psyche. From a young age, Jessica Camilleri's life was marked by challenges. Born with a range of developmental and behavioural issues, she struggled to fit in. School became a battleground where she faced bullying and isolation. Her parents, Rita and Michael, loved their daughter dearly but were ill-equipped to handle her condition. As Jessica grew older, her problems only seemed to intensify. Arguments were frequent, often escalating into screaming matches. The weight of Jessica's unspoken pain created a volatile environment. Rita Camilleri, known for her kind heart, dedicated her life to Jessica. She ferried Jessica to countless doctor's appointments, seeking answers. The toll of caring for a child with severe issues is immense. Rita's health began to deteriorate, and she lived in constant anxiety. Despite the challenges, Rita never gave up on her daughter. Little did she know that her unwavering love would lead to unimaginable tragedy. Jessica grappled with serious mental health issues. She received various diagnoses, including autism spectrum disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Jessica also being described as childlike, naive, narcissistic, and egocentric. Medications brought temporary relief, but often exacerbated her problems. Jessica had stopped taking her medication 6 months prior to the incident, deciding she wanted to commence an all-natural treatment. The lack of a clear diagnosis left Jessica feeling lost and isolated. Mental illness is complex and often misunderstood. For Jessica and her family, the search for answers became a desperate race against time. The relationship between Jessica and Rita became increasingly strained. Jessica's mental health issues created a chasm between them. Their arguments became more frequent and intense. Despite the challenges, Rita never stopped loving her daughter. The relentless strain left Rita feeling trapped, alone, and let down by all systems. Jessica fixated on things. She would make prank calls to strangers over 100 times daily, watch horror movies on repeat. The bond between mother and daughter was ultimately pushed to its breaking point. The days leading up to July 20th, 2019 seemed deceptively normal. Rita went about her routines with a forced smile. Jessica seemed unusually subdued. Neighbors noted the unusual silence. One neighbor even tried to warn Rita, saying, "That girl is going to murder someone." Rita responded by saying, "Not my Jessica, she wouldn't hurt a fly." A fortnight later, 57-year-old Rita Camilleri was stabbed to death in a frenzied knife attack. Jessica's mind was becoming consumed by a dark obsession. Her thoughts painted her mother as a threat that needed to be eliminated. The stage was set for a tragedy that would shatter the fragile peace. Jessica's obsession centered around a perceived injustice. Her distorted thoughts magnified every perceived wrong. She paced her room, muttering to herself, replaying conversations. Rita, oblivious to the turmoil, continued to reach out. The calm before the storm had settled, a harbinger of horrors to come. The nightmare began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A raised voice, a slammed door, an argument over a misplaced remote. Jessica's eyes hardened with a chilling intensity. Words turned into accusations, accusations into threats. Rita tried to reason with her daughter, but her words were met with abuse. The room transformed into a battleground. Jessica, fueled by delusions, had other plans. The argument escalated with terrifying speed. Jessica lunged at her mother, her small frame imbued with unnatural strength. Rita cried out in surprise and pain. Fear coursed through Rita's veins as she realized the extent of her daughter's madness. Jessica continued her assault, her movements becoming more frenzied. The kitchen transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror. Time seemed to warp as the horrific scene unfolded. Rita fought for her life, her cries for help swallowed by the walls. Jessica, consumed by rage and delusion, continued her assault. Rita's resistance waned with each passing moment. Her cries weakened into whimpers of pain and despair. The idyllic facade of suburban normalcy shattered, revealing raw, primal terror. The first responders to the Camilleri home that night were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. The silence of the suburban street was shattered by the flashing lights of police cars and ambulances. The air, thick with the smell of blood and the raw stench of violence, hung heavy over the manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges. Upon arrival of the New South Wales police, Jessica was standing outside the front, drenched in blood, and when the police approached, Jessica pointed to her mother's head that she dropped on the footpath in front of the neighbour's home. Stepping over the threshold, the officers entered a nightmare. The once immaculate home was now a macabre tableau of violence and despair. Furniture lay overturned, shattered glass crunched underfoot, and blood, so much blood, stained the walls, the floor, and everything it touched. Senior Constable Bennett, from the New South Wales Police Sydney Crime Scene Unit, was attending the St Clair home. On the tiled floor was the body of the deceased, head decapitated, 6 knives broken and intact surrounding the deceased. Senior Constable Bennett said in a statement read to the court, "To the right was a human tongue. Further to the right, under the fridge, was a piece of skin I believed to be a human nose." The head had numerous jagged and penetrating wounds exposing the cervical spine. Human eyeballs were on the tiles under the deceased neck. The experienced officers, hardened by years of witnessing the darkest corners of humanity, struggled to maintain their composure. The sheer brutality of the attack, the raw, primal fury evident in every blood-soaked detail, sent chills down their spines. This was not a crime of passion, not a spontaneous act of violence. This was something far more sinister, far more calculated, something that spoke of a darkness that defied comprehension. As they moved through the house, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence, they came across blood-soaked hair, human tissue, pools if vomit, overlapping blood-soaked footprints and a decapitated Crocodile Dundee figurine. In the kitchen, amidst the overturned chairs and shattered dishes, lay the body of Rita Camilleri. Section 2. Covered in blood. Rita's body, bearing over 100 stab wounds, lay sprawled on the blood-soaked kitchen floor. Her once vibrant eyes, now vacant and staring into nothingness, reflected the unimaginable terror of her final moments. Defensive wounds on her hands, a mother's last desperate attempt to ward off her attacker, spoke volumes of the sheer brutality of the assault. Her clothes, her hair, her face, were all splattered with the gruesome evidence of her crime. Yet, there was an eerie calmness about her, a detachment from the horror she had unleashed. Her eyes, devoid of remorse or even comprehension, darted around the room, as if searching for something she had misplaced. The officers, their training kicking in despite the shock and revulsion that churned within them, moved quickly to apprehend Jessica. She offered no resistance, her body seemingly limp, her gaze fixed on some unseen horror only she could perceive. As they led her away, her blood-soaked hands leaving a chilling trail behind her, a single haunting question echoed through the minds of everyone present. What could drive a daughter to commit such an act of unspeakable violence against her own mother? The scene that unfolded that night in St Clair was not easily forgotten. It left an indelible mark on the first responders, the investigators, and the community as a whole. It was a stark reminder that even in the quietest of suburbs, behind the facade of normalcy, darkness can lurk, waiting for the right moment to explode into our lives with terrifying consequences. Section 3. A community in shock. News of the horrific crime spread like wildfire through the quiet streets of St Clair. Neighbours, accustomed to the peace and predictability of their suburban lives, gathered in small, shocked groups, their faces etched with disbelief and horror. The idyllic bubble of their community had been shattered, replaced by a chilling reality that was impossible to ignore. The Camilleri house, once a symbol of family and normalcy, was now cordoned off with blue and white police tape, a macabre spectacle that drew curious onlookers and television news crews alike. The image of the once cheerful home, now a silent testament to unimaginable violence, became seared into the collective memory of the community. Parents hugged their children a little tighter, their hearts heavy with a mixture of grief and fear. The unthinkable had happened in their midst, shattering the illusion of safety and security that had always defined their lives. The whispers started, speculations swirling like the autumn leaves that would soon fall upon the blood-soaked ground. Who were the Camilleris? What could have driven a daughter to commit such a horrific act against her own mother? The tragedy in St. Clair became a chilling reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected of places, that even in the seemingly idyllic world of suburbia, darkness can find a foothold, tearing apart families and leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Section 4. Whispers and Speculation. In the days following the murder, the quiet streets of St. Clair buzzed with a morbid curiosity. Neighbours, struggling to reconcile the horrific crime with the seemingly normal family they thought they knew, exchanged hushed whispers and speculative glances. The Camilleris, once just another family in the neighbourhood, became the subject of endless conjecture. The local newspaper, eager to capitalise on the sensational story, published articles detailing every known detail of the crime, from the gruesome nature of Rita's injuries to the chilling calmness of Jessica's demeanour upon her arrest. Television news crews camped out on the street corner, their cameras capturing every tearful interview, every solemn pronouncement from law enforcement officials. Theories abounded, each more outlandish than the last. Some whispered of a family history of violence, of dark secrets hidden behind closed doors. Others speculated about drug use, mental instability, or a possible love triangle gone wrong. The truth, as it often does, lay somewhere in the shadows, a complex tapestry woven from mental illness, family dysfunction, and the tragic consequences of a system ill-equipped to handle the needs of its most vulnerable members. As the days turned into weeks, the initial shock began to give way to a collective grief. Candlelight vigils were held, flowers piled high outside the Camilleri home, and messages of condolence poured in from across the country. The community, united in their sorrow and disbelief, struggled to come to terms with the knowledge that such a horrific act could occur in their midst. As the investigation into Rita Camilleri's murder progressed, the weight of evidence against Jessica became overwhelming. The physical evidence, the blood-soaked clothes, the murder weapon found at the scene, the DNA evidence linking Jessica to the crime, painted a damning picture. But it was Jessica's own words, recorded in a chilling phone call made shortly after the attack, that sealed her fate. In the call, played in court to a hushed courtroom, Jessica could be heard confessing to the murder, her voice devoid of emotion as she described the horrific details of the attack. She spoke of her rage, her sense of betrayal, and her belief that her mother had wronged her beyond repair. Her words, chilling in their detachment and lack of remorse, provided a disturbing glimpse into the mind of a young woman consumed by delusion and driven to commit an act of unimaginable violence. The prosecution, led by a seasoned prosecutor known for his meticulous approach to building a case, presented a mountain of evidence against Jessica. They argued that the attack on Rita was premeditated, fueled by a long-standing resentment and a distorted perception of reality. They pointed to Jessica's history of mental illness, her volatile temper, and her increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading up to the murder as evidence of her capacity for violence. The defense team, faced with the daunting task of defending a client who had confessed to the crime, focused on Jessica's mental state. They argued that Jessica, suffering from a severe mental illness, was not in control of her actions on the night of the murder. They presented expert testimony from psychiatrists who diagnosed Jessica with a range of mental disorders, including autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, and borderline personality disorder. The trial of Jessica Camilleri for the murder of her mother, Rita, was a harrowing affair. The courtroom, packed with members of the media, legal professionals, and curious onlookers, became a crucible where the complexities of mental illness, family dysfunction, and the very nature of justice were put on trial. The jury, tasked with the unenviable responsibility of weighing the evidence and rendering a verdict, listened intently as the prosecution and defense presented their cases. They heard the horrific details of the crime, the chilling testimony of first responders and investigators, and the heartbreaking accounts of family and friends who struggled to reconcile the loving mother and daughter they knew with the unimaginable violence that had torn their lives apart. After weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate Jessica's fate. The weight of their decision, the knowledge that their verdict would have life-altering consequences for both Jessica and the memory of her mother, hung heavy in the air. The eyes of the community, of the nation, were upon them, watching and waiting for a resolution to the case that had captivated and horrified in equal measure. The verdict, when it finally came, was swift and decisive. Jessica Camilleri was found guilty of the murder of Rita Camilleri and sentenced to 21 years and 4 months in prison, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 4 months. The sentence, while bringing a sense of closure to a community still reeling from the tragedy, did little to ease the pain and loss felt by those whose lives had been forever changed by the events of that fateful July night. The courtroom, heavy with anticipation, fell silent as Judge Helen Wilson prepared to deliver Jessica Camilleri's sentence. The air crackled with a tension that was almost palpable. On one side of the courtroom, Rita's family and friends, their faces etched with grief and a quiet dignity, waited with bated breath. On the other side sat Jessica, her gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance, her demeanor as inscrutable as ever. The weight of the verdict, the knowledge that her actions had resulted in the loss of her mother's life and her own freedom, seemed to press down on her. Yet her expression remained curiously blank, as if she were detached from the gravity of the moment. Judge Wilson, known for her fairness and her unwavering commitment to justice, addressed the court in measured tones. She acknowledged the horrific nature of the crime, the sheer brutality of the attack, and the devastating impact it had on Rita's loved ones. She spoke of the sanctity of life, the importance of protecting the vulnerable, and the need to hold those who commit acts of violence accountable for their actions. And then, the sentence. 21 years and 4 months, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 4 months. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom as the weight of the sentence settled over the room. For Rita's family, it was a bittersweet victory, a recognition of their loss, but a poor substitute for the justice they truly sought, the return of their beloved Rita. The sentence handed down to Jessica Camilleri ignited a firestorm of debate across Australia. Was it justice for a daughter who had taken her own mother's life in such a brutal manner? Or was it a miscarriage of mercy for a young woman grappling with severe mental illness? The case, already a media sensation, became a lightning rod for discussions about the intersection of mental health, criminal responsibility, and the very nature of justice. Those who believed the sentence was just argued that Jessica, despite her mental health issues, was capable of understanding the wrongfulness of her actions. They pointed to the calculated nature of the attack, the fact that she had attempted to cover up her crime, and her chilling lack of remorse in the immediate aftermath of the murder. They argued that anything less than a lengthy prison sentence would be an affront to Rita's memory and would send a dangerous message that violence, even when committed by those with mental illness, would be tolerated. On the other side of the debate were those who believed that the sentence was too harsh, that it failed to take into account the complexities of Jessica's mental state. They argued that Jessica, imprisoned by her delusions and overwhelmed by her illness, was not acting with criminal intent, but was rather a victim of her own broken mind. They called for compassion and understanding, urging the justice system to focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. The debate, often heated and emotionally charged, reflected the deep divisions within society about how to address the issue of mental illness within the criminal justice system. It highlighted the need for greater understanding, for more resources, and for a more compassionate approach that balances the needs of victims with the rights of those living with mental illness. The iron gates of the correctional facility clanged shut behind Jessica, severing her last tie to the outside world. The cacophony of the courtroom, the flashing lights of the cameras, the endless scrutiny of the public eye, all of it faded into a distant memory as she entered the cold, sterile environment of prison life. Her journey, once defined by the chaos and dysfunction of her illness and the horrific act that had come to define her, now took on a stark, unforgiving rhythm dictated by the rules and regulations of prison life. The early days were the hardest. The isolation, the loss of freedom, the constant surveillance. It was a far cry from the chaotic but familiar world she had known. The faces around her were hardened, their eyes reflecting years of pain, regret, and a weary acceptance of their fate. The guards, tasked with maintaining order within the unforgiving walls of the prison, approached their duties with a detached professionalism that bordered on indifference. Jessica, stripped of her identity as a daughter, a sister, a friend, was now known only by a number, her life defined by a rigid schedule of meals, work assignments, and limited recreational activities. The world outside, with its seasons changing, its celebrations and its tragedies, continued on without her. She became a shadow, a ghost haunting the corridors of her own mind, forever tethered to the memory of the crime that had brought her to this desolate place. Yet even within the confines of prison, there were glimmers of hope. She began to see a therapist regularly, her sessions offering a rare space for introspection and self-reflection. She started taking medication again, this time with more consistency and a renewed hope that it might help quiet the voices in her head, the voices that had haunted her for so long. She enrolled in classes, her mind, starved for stimulation, eagerly absorbing knowledge about the world she had left behind. The journey ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in her life, Jessica dared to believe that there might be a path to redemption, a way to atone for the past and build a future, however uncertain, within the unforgiving confines of her new reality. The chilling case of Jessica Camilleri left an indelible mark on the community of St. Clair and the broader Australian psyche. It served as a stark reminder that behind the facade of suburban normalcy, darkness can lurk, often in the most unexpected of places. The case ignited fierce debates about the complexities of mental illness, the adequacy of support systems, and the very meaning of justice. Jessica's story is not just a tale of a horrific crime, but a tragic illustration of a life derailed by mental illness. It underscores the devastating consequences of untreated mental health issues, not just for the individual, but for families and communities as a whole. Rita Camilleri's unwavering love for her daughter, a love that ultimately led her down a path of unimaginable tragedy, serves as a poignant reminder of the heavy toll that mental illness can take on families. The case sparked a national conversation about the urgent need for increased funding for mental health services, for earlier intervention, and for greater understanding and support for those living with mental illness and their families. It highlighted the inadequacies of a system ill-equipped to handle the complex needs of individuals like Jessica, a system that often fails to provide the necessary support until it is too late. The scars of that July night run deep, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life, the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness, and the urgent need for a more compassionate and effective approach to mental health care. The case of Jessica Camilleri, forever etched in the annals of Australian true crime, stands as a stark warning, a call to action, and a solemn reminder that we must do better for the Jessicas and Ritas of the world before tragedy strikes again.